you'll consider joining. It's quick and easy, and we'll drop a link in at some point tonight where you can go ahead and do that. If you have questions, you can email them to questions@coloradosun.com, and we'll try and get them to the different guests. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it, since we've only got the governor here till 7. So I'm going to make sure we talk to him quickly. So Governor Jared Polis doesn't really need much of an introduction, but he's in the final year of his first term and running for re-election in November. And Governor, I'd like to hand over the floor to you just to talk a little bit about the priorities you have, or the accomplishments you felt like you had during this legislative session.
Well, this was really a historic session. As I said at the onset of my State of the State address, we wanted to find 50 ways to save people money, and I think we found even more. There's no question we have a strong economy. The new unemployment figures out more people employed than ever before in almost every sector. But we are not immune in Colorado to inflation, supply chain issues, and a lot of other issues. So we want to do everything we can as a state to help make sure that Coloradans can hold on to more of their hard-earned money. And we really have a comprehensive agenda aligned with that. Obviously, the capstone, every Colorado taxpayer will get $500 back, $1,000 per couple at least. That's based on the actuals. Depending on how May and June go, it could be more, but $500 per person, $1,000 per couple. Between the last 2 sessions, we provided over $1 billion in property tax relief. About over $700 million this session, about $300 million last session. That's $1 billion that people will have in their pockets to be able to afford increases in cost of living, or spend a night out, or go on vacation, or save for college, or save for retirement. 2 cuts to the income tax during my tenure. And it doesn't end there. We also implemented free universal preschool that starts in fall of 23. Wish it was sooner, but that's the fastest it can be done. And then kindergarten, in my first year in office, free full day kindergarten. So free full day kindergarten saves families with kindergartners about $500 a month. Universal free preschool save families about $4,300 a year at least. Reinsurance, reducing rates in the health exchange by over 20%. This year, additional efforts to make sure that pharmaceutical refunds actually go back to lower costs rather than get eaten up by middlemen along the way. We were also really excited to do a lot of fee relief, and I signed fee relief for behavioral health workers, for nurses. Normally, a lot of folks don't know this, but to be like a behavioral health professional or a nurse, you have to pay the state a licensing fee. That's because those are managed at Department of Regulatory Affairs. Their budget is the fees that people pay in. The last thing that we should be doing here in the wake of the pandemic, when our healthcare workers work so hard, is saying you should pay the state for the privilege of being a nurse. No, that's wrong. We should be thanking you for being a healthcare professional. And in addition to saving you $85, $140, there's different levels of licenses. By the way, that's a night out for you and their family. It absolutely helps make Colorado more livable, hold on to more of your hard-earned money. But it's also a gesture of thanks from a grateful state of Colorado to say, you know what, with one-time funds we can backfill that. You can renew your license for free. Please continue to practice, bring your skills in behavioral health and medicine to our state. One final big item, which I just don't think gets enough attention, is how thoughtfully and well our state came together, Republicans and Democrats across the state, on investing the American Rescue Act funds. So when we first found out we were getting these funds, we embarked on a bipartisan statewide listening tour. Republican leadership, Democratic leadership, members from different regions joined us. It was mostly virtual at the time because it was during COVID, some in person. Treasurer Dave Young joined us. Out of that came, no matter where we worked, Fort Morgan, Grand Junction, Pueblo, Denver, housing, workforce, behavioral health. These rose to the top across the state. And so we then began a very thoughtful bipartisan process around each of these. What's the best way to get the biggest bang for our buck in housing? It's not just spending $4 or $5 million, $100 million building housing. It's leveraging that. How do you unlock billions of dollars of housing for Coloradans? With the one-time money we have, including modular homes and new technology, transit plan communities, and density, and more affordability close to where jobs are. Workforce development, the 1330 task force, amazing work around this transformational change in how we think about upskilling and reskilling, and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to get the skills they need to have a good, not just job, but career, and also filling those holes in the private sector that power our economy. Good for our economy, good for individuals, and really important. And then, of course, behavioral health. A lot of thoughtful investment about one-time investments around additional treatment beds for people who are recovering from addiction, step-down facilities, support for youth. Really important at this time to really focus on those. And really almost all those bills, Jesse, or nearly all of them, came out almost unanimous. And it's rare to have that kind of consensus. There were very few items on that investment of close to $2 billion over two different sessions that was controversial. That really speaks to the thoughtfulness of our Republican and Democratic legislators, really saying, you know what, we have this opportunity with these American Rescue Act funds. Let's make the most of them for Colorado. And I want to tell my fellow Coloradans, you're going to see the benefit of these in the years ahead. Housing doesn't change overnight, right? We complain about affordability. You don't bring a bunch of inventory on tap in a week, but the mechanism is in place to make this better rather than worse over the next year and 2 years, right? Behavioral health, better. Workforce, going to get even more amazing. We want to lead in workforce in Colorado. So really excited about that. And of course, saving people money first and foremost. Every Colorado family, every Colorado taxpayer will be able to hold on to more of their hard-earned money. Over to you, Jesse.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm not going to sing like you did during your State of the State address, but this was the money, 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 money legislative session. I thought I'd try and think about these things in themes. But I wanted to start off by asking you, I know you and your staff have said that in every legislative session since you took office, you've been trying to save people money, but it seems like there's been extra emphasis on it this year. And I wonder, the political cynic in me, how much of this is in response to the political climate, the fact that Republicans are attacking Democrats heading into the November elections about, the rising cost of living, the gas going up, all the things that are kind of pinching everybody's wallets.
Yeah. So first of all, it's in response to economic climate, not political climate, and I'll come back to that. But second of all, this was very much our agenda from the get-go. So in the list of litany of things, and I could go on for 10 minutes about saving people money, but in that litany, much of that was in our first session, right? Free to full-day kindergarten, saving families $500 a month, reinsurance, bipartisan, both were bipartisan, of course. Reinsurance, reducing rates by 20% for individuals in the exchange, 30% in the mountain areas that paid the most. So we really felt, in fact, one of our first actions was creating the Saving People Money on Healthcare office and really having deliverables there to reduce insurance premiums across our state. Now, the economic times are different, right? This is a very challenging economic moment we're in. The jobs are out there. Growth is strong. Tax revenues are strong. Jobs are there, but costs are going up. So what can we do to make sure that people can hold on to more of their hard-earned money, get those refunds out, reduce property taxes, reduce fees? That is the call of the moment from an economic perspective, right? And that's different. I mean, 2-3 years ago, we came in laser-like, let's reduce healthcare costs, take on big pharma, take on insurance, save people money. Now, of course, it's about saving people money more broadly, because that's the single biggest issue facing our state is rising costs.
So one of the things you said the other day after you signed the bill to slow the implementation of the new gas fee was, and I remember you shouted out, you said, quote, no new gas fees, no fees, no new fees on gas after you signed the bill. But of course, this is a delay of the implementation. In April 2023, people are going to start seeing those gas fees. All these things were kind of one-time funds. The relief runs out. So how can what are Coloradans supposed to do or to expect in 9 months from now when all of a sudden all these things start piling up and the savings don't continue?
Coloradans should know that their elected leaders have sometimes, not always, sometimes more common sense than they get credit for. Of course, when gas is $4.10 a gallon, and by the way, we have one of the lowest per gallon gas fees in the country. It's $4.50 nationally. It's $4.14 here. Way too high, right? Obviously, now is not the time for any fees on gas. If next April gas is at $4 or $5 a gallon, I would strongly suspect that, again, no new fees would be imposed on gas. When gas is $1.50, $2, $2.20 a gallon, 2 cents for roads is something that people can go for. So let's show some common sense here. I think everybody can agree that now is the last time in the world you'd want to charge anything additional for gas. Of course, we know that we can backfill those funds. By the way, people should know this. Just because we're cutting those gas fees doesn't mean our roads are being deprived of one dime. So to be clear, the gas fees fund the roads. People have a general awareness of that. But by avoiding this 2 cent per gallon fee, the legislature is using one-time money so that it funds the roads, it funds bridges, just as if that fee was in place, but the savings go to the individual, and we just use other funds to fill that because of the high price of gas which is really a difficulty for everybody who needs to commute or get to work or get to the places they love in our state.
So at the beginning of next year, if gas prices are still high, will you push the legislature to set aside funds in its budget to extend, the break or the pause and the implementation of the gas fee?
Yeah, there's more we need to do. So we need to prepare our budget. I can't remember the delivery date. I think it's November. So it really depends on where gas is at. I think that we need to, and by the way, 13% of vehicles sold in our state are electric vehicles. I've called on the federal government to take real action because, well, again, we're proud that our price of gas is 30, 40 cents lower in Colorado. It's not a win when it's $4.15 a gallon, even if it's $5.80 in California, Jesse. Literally, average is $5.80 a gallon in California. I'm not kidding you. $4.55 across the country. But what I called on the president to do is release more from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to lower prices, and most importantly, defer the federal gas tax. That's 18 cents. Here we like to talk about 2 cents. 18 cents, suspend that either for 6 months, for 9 months, or trigger it, meaning if gas is above $3.50 a gallon, it goes away. If gas comes down, it comes back, something like that, just really to show that we want to save people money.
One of our readers had this question is kind of along this vein, is whether or not you plan on signing the new producer responsibility bill into law, which would, charge companies that produce products like, plastic bottles or aluminum cans that would have to pay into a statewide nonprofit to run a statewide recycling program. Obviously, that would be an extra added cost for business, might pass on to consumers. Um, is that something you plan on signing into law? Is that a piece of
Yeah,
legislation?
so this bill does not trigger any type of fees or charges. What it does is it creates a process to figure out what those would be, and then they come back to the governor, to the legislature to say, do we want to move forward in a couple of years? So do I support moving forward with the process? Absolutely. Our concerns were addressed in the bill. Of course, we would not have wanted to sign up for some kind of carte blanche charge or fee, but this just moves the process forward. And then let's see what those would look like and whether it makes sense in 2 or 3 or 4 years. I think it's 2026. And I believe it's the then governor, whether it's me or somebody else, and it's the then legislature that then can decide whether to move forward or not with that.
Okay, and I take that as a yes, that you will sign that.
Oh yeah, our concerns were addressed, absolutely. So we had a lot of concerns about something that might have added costs or not come back or been automatic. This needs to have oversight. We need to figure out what it is before we decide whether to move forward. The bill now has that. I'm good with the bill, and we'll be signing it soon.
Okay, so obviously one of the big bills that passed the legislature this session had to do with abortion access, national issue, talking about it, going on with this report. You got into some hot water this week on Colorado Public Radio when you compared, abortion procedures to a nose job. I know there were folks on the progressive side of the aisle that were really upset about that. I wanted to give you a chance to respond and maybe explain what you were trying to get at.
Well, I mean, look, when I'm accessible, Jesse. I do a lot of interviews. Ryan Warner likes to ask the same thing 3, 4 times, and sometimes you put your foot in the mouth. Obviously, for any woman who's had an abortion out there, they know that it is nothing like cosmetic surgery, and I certainly didn't want to offend it. I'm pro-choice, strongly pro-choice, always have been, expect to be. This is a very personal decision, not one that the government should get involved with making for women.
And I wanted to follow up. I'll be a little bit Ryan Warner on this question, but in 2024, the abortion rights group are planning to put a measure on the ballot that would change the Constitution to allow public funds to be used for abortion in Colorado. And I didn't quite hear an answer in that interview, so I wanted to give you another chance to see if that's something you think you'd support.
You know what, Ryan? I mean, yeah, calling you Ryan, Freudian slip. You know what, Jesse? I haven't even looked at what items are going to be on the 2024 ballot yet. Maybe we'll talk. I'll get my blue book and I'll evaluate them. Obviously, if I haven't seen the draft of something, there's no possible way I could know what the position is. I support protecting choice for women. If it's something that protects choice for women, you can generally count on me to be supportive of it. I was proud to sign RIA. If there's other proposals, I will be happy to look at them with that value lens of how do we support freedom for Coloradans to be able to control their own reproduction of one of the most intimate rights that people have.
Okay, and I know we've got 5 minutes left because I got to keep you to your schedule. So I'll ask another reader question here. One of our readers wants to know, is Colorado prepared for more COVID variants? Do we feel like we're getting enough help from the federal government? And are we taking, the pandemic still seriously enough?
So, my biggest complaint of the federal government at this point is the slow process at the FDA. And you get all our press releases, so you've seen I've been a steadily drumbeat of saying, why haven't we facilitated approval for birth to 5 for the vaccine? I was joined by Republican Governor Charlie Baker on that. The other issue I'm concerned about is why aren't we having the variant-specific vaccines available? Right now, yes, people can go get a 4th dose. I personally haven't. My elderly parents have. But why aren't we getting the Omicron-specific vaccine, which has been developed months ago and is just sort of stuck there? We're getting, in many ways, what we know is a less effective vaccine. So frustrated with that. And I hope the FDA realizes that, yes, lives are at stake. Where Colorado is, my North Star from the very start, you were at a lot of those early press conferences. We will not exceed our hospital capacity. We did not. We're not in jeopardy now. It saddens me, of course, that 140 Coloradans are in the hospital from COVID right now, but we have the capacity to serve hundreds more if needed. And we want to make sure that people are empowered with the information to make the best choices they can. Getting vaccinated for extra protection, of course, wearing a medical grade mask indoor around others if they choose to, and other ways that people can stay safe.
One of our other readers is asking, they're concerned about high housing costs, and I know that there was the Mobile Home Residents Bill of Rights bill that you had some influence in, and the folks in the legislature said they pared it back at your request. Can you talk about your thinking there and why you have to put the language out as?
Yeah, so it's interesting. People always kind of think about, especially your savvy people watching this, people that are kind of, you're an insider, by the way. If you're watching this, you're an insider. Sorry, you can't trust insiders. You are one if you're watching Jesse and I talk right now. So look, the governor, can stop things but can't start things. So at the start of every session, there's usually a few things we really want to get done. Saving people money, in our case, preschool, kindergarten, central my agenda. Fortunately, many legislators share that value. We are involved with those, of course, because we want to make sure we get them done. There are many other ideas that come from legislators. And sometimes we have to say at the end of the day, it might not be something that the governor is thrilled with, but I weigh it and I say, is it more harm than good? More good than harm. And if it's more good than harm, at the end of the day, I put my name on it. If it's more harm than good, I veto it. I just signed a great mobile home bill in Fort Collins 2 days ago, $35 million housing, helping people, mobile home residents, purchase their mobile home lot. And this was really exciting. It was in a mobile home park, 76 residents or so, almost all Spanish speaking, first generation. They were just so excited. They're looking at purchasing that through a nonprofit in perpetuity to keep their rates low. I think that that's the kind of answer we need. Additional protections. There's also the issue of when somebody has to move, if the lot sells, how can they, how do they get out of the lease, or how do they move whatever real property they have there? So we're very open to this discussion. I would argue that mobile home communities are part of the housing solution, and we need them. Just like we need unattached dwelling units, we need modular housing, we need transit-oriented development, denser, so people can afford to live near where jobs are, or on bus routes or train routes to get to where they need to go.
Right, and to give you credit, and you and the Democrats, both parties in the legislature, spend a lot of money to help, modular home factories and explore more mobile home units.
I'm going to be at one in Grand Junction tomorrow. I am so excited. So we have one in Pueblo, and part of this is we need that manufacturing capacity close to where the homes are deployed, because if they're made several states over, the transportation costs are much larger. So we want to build that modular home capacity here in Colorado, lower cost and great quality. If you haven't been in some of these modular homes, every bit of the quality of built on site construction at a lower cost. It's really exciting.
So I've got 2 more minutes here. I know I asked you this question on Monday, but things have developed throughout the week. So I wanted to check in again to see if there's any bills you plan on vetoing that were passed this session. I know on Monday you said no, but
yeah, I think I said no to any specific bills, but probably I suspect yes once we read them all, Jesse. So we got 300 bills, and our team, we have a wonderful team, and many of you know, David and Allie, our legal team, Cara. We go through every single one, and at the end of the day, I get an analysis, I weigh them. I think what you can expect is we were able to work through all the major agenda items. I don't think you're going to see any big surprises on major agenda items. We work with legislators on those. I don't think there's any surprises. But the flip side of that is I fully expect that there'll be 3, 4, I don't know, 6 bills, however many, that we find something in where we say, wait a minute, maybe there's an inadvertent legal issue, and there have been in the past in some, or maybe it's one that just on the merits, I feel it causes slightly more harm than benefit, and it's better just to start from scratch next session, even if it's a good idea. So again, those announcements will come out, and I'm sure there'll be a few of them. But on the big agenda items, the big things the media has been reported on, I really think that those are all net positives for our state, and I compliment the work of Republicans and Democrats for getting those done.
Well, great. I promised 7, and I like to respect your time. So thank you so much for joining us again. Sorry for starting a little bit late, but we appreciate your perspective, and thanks for always joining these events. We really
Thank you.
appreciate
Have a great evening.
it. You too. All right. Well, thank you. Great to hear from the governor as always. So we've got 4 lawmakers who are joining us now. We're going to start out with the state Senate panel. And we have 2 senators who are joining us, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. We have State Senator Paul Lundeen, a monument Republican, who might not like me saying this, but he's in line to be one of the Republican leaders in the Senate, whether it's a minority leader or Senate president. We'll see what happens in November. And then we also have State Senator Chris Hansen, Denver Democrat and incoming chair of the Joint Budget Committee. We welcome you both, and I know that Senator Hansen had a really busy session, and so did Senator Lundeen. So I think I see Senator Lundeen's video coming on, so we'll see him in a second. But my first question goes to Senator Hansen, so that's good. We're prepared there. So Senator Hansen, you and I spent so much of the end of the session talking about property tax cuts and property tax legislation in an effort to reduce Coloradans' property tax burden in the coming years. Because of rising cost of living, rising value rates. And this was all part of a deal to prevent an even larger cut from going to the ballot. But the background here is that the agreement that was reached is that, in the future, you guys are going to work on this issue and try and, reshape the property tax system. I wonder if you have any contours that you'd like to see kind of shape up there. If there are ideas that you're bringing to the table, the governor has mentioned, maybe making this maybe tackling Airbnbs and short rentals, taxing them at a different rate. What kind of ideas do you have to bring to the table?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. It's such a great question. We've worked hard over the last couple of years on providing direct property tax relief, really trying to avoid the mistake of what we did with the Gallagher Amendment, where we put a very strict formula into the Constitution, then you don't have any flexibility to adjust to the latest economic data. So that was really the theory after the voters decided to remove Gallagher from the Constitution. We then could look at what was appreciation, what was changing in the market on the commercial and the residential side, and then adjust accordingly. And I think our guiding principle here was that we wanted to provide relief, take this kind of the spike out of what we're seeing on the appreciation side, so that homeowners aren't getting hit with a particularly large change, but at the same time making sure that we could fund the schools and fund the fire service, the water districts, et cetera, that depend on those property taxes. So that was really the balance we were trying to strike, and I think we've successfully done that for the last couple of years. To your question about what other ideas are out there, we looked really hard at some ways that we might be able to create some adjustable formulas. It's difficult because, of course, you've got periods where there's really high economic growth and high appreciation. Then, of course, you're trying to make a formula that works just as well when you've got the opposite case, which we certainly don't hope happens, but could happen because of the economic change. And so, yeah, I totally agree with the governor. We absolutely need to look at short-term rentals. That was something I pushed really hard in the last interim and had a bill drafted on that ultimately wasn't successful. But that's something we're going to keep working on because, short-term rentals, in many cases, they might be rented several hundred days a year. And that is essentially commercial activity. And so I think it just out of fairness, if you've got a short-term rental that's getting, a huge amount of commercial use, it should be on par with, Airbnb, normal bed and breakfasts or hotels that have to pay the commercial rate. So that's one of the ideas we'll certainly be looking at over the interim.
And Senator Lundeen, I don't know if you're there.
I'm here. Can you hear me, Jess?
Yeah, we can definitely hear you. So that's
Well,
helpful.
I'll tell you what, I have got a face for radio, so maybe this is the best way to do this anyway.
You definitely have a good voice. Well, so for those who don't know, Senator Lundeen was a broadcast journalist at one point. You kind of hear from his voice, which is...
You know what? We were good on the first link. We were good on the second link. I don't know what happened, but we've clearly got a tech problem of some sort.
Yeah, we'll get you back. I don't know if you heard what we were talking about on property taxes. the efforts to kind of create a long-term solution. It was interesting, Senator Hansen, you seemed to suggest, floating rates sounds a lot like Gallagher did, but Senator Lundeen, I don't know if you've thought about this issue and kind of where, you'd like to see the state go on property taxes and some things you'd like to see brought to the table as this discussion goes on.
Absolutely. A couple of thoughts specifically about the property tax issue. The bill that Senator Hansen and Senator Rankin brought, we debated and was passed. I think does in fact achieve some degree of the leveling, the smoothing, as Senator Hansen described it to happen. I want to point out, and then I would point out again to some of the things that the governor said previously, that a lot of the money that is in the process of providing tax relief is already the taxpayers' money. It's money that would go back to the taxpayers under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And a portion of the $700 million in property tax relief that Senate Bill 233 provides is money that would have made its way back to the taxpayers one way or another. Senator Hansen and I had the beginning of what I believe will be a spirited debate about looking at more broadly all of our taxes. Are there sales tax, income tax, property tax changes we could make to provide greater relief to the taxpayers and, quite frankly, accelerate instead of creating friction within the natural economy of Colorado? So yes, and challenges ahead.
Okay, and so this next question is for you. Let's stay with you, Senator Lundeen. You and Senator Kirkmeyer brought an interesting amendment trying to spend hundreds of millions of extra dollars to eliminate the budget stabilization factor in Colorado. We've got a good explainer about this on our website, but essentially, during the recession, the state started kind of shortchanging schools, and there's been this backfill that hasn't been, or this deficit that hasn't been totally filled. But one of the questions that I remember Senator Hansen asking this on the Senate floor is, what do you want to cut out of the budget in order to pay for that? So I guess, as we head into a year where it looks like it's going to be possible, how do you think that the legislature should have changed its priorities or should in the future to make sure that this money is going to schools and to eliminate this IOU that's been around for such a long time?
Absolutely. Great question. And it's always a question of prioritization. I would say that budgets are policy. They demonstrate our priorities. My personal priority is great education for the children of Colorado through the public schools of Colorado and great roads and bridges to provide a smooth and active economy in the state of Colorado. So those would be my two priorities. And the bill that Senator Kirkmeyer and I brought would have paid off what's called the budget stabilization factor or the BS factor. And it would have given a nod to paying teachers more. The reality is the bill as drafted, written, and footnoted said simply that we need to pay teachers more. It is my personal perspective that the golden triangle of public education is an enthusiastic student, engaged parents, and exceptional teachers. Now, since I don't have my camera on, you can't see me drawing the little triangle in the air that I draw every time I say that. But paying those teachers more is an important thing, and we should be doing that. And quite frankly, the bill we brought and that died in its first committee would have, in fact, done that. The question is priorities. Well, I stood on the Senate floor one day on third reading bills, and we accumulated almost $200 million for priorities that I ultimately voted against. Now, we could break that down policy by policy, and I do respect deeply the work that the Joint Budget Committee and Senator Hansen on the Joint Budget Committee do to develop the budget that becomes the budget of Colorado. I'd approach it a little bit differently. My priorities would be a little bit different. It would be, we created hired almost 1,000 additional state employees in the budget this year. Quite frankly, I don't think I would have created all of those additional jobs. I would have put the money elsewhere being in teacher paychecks.
Senator Lundeen, I know one of the interesting things you bring up, I think I've heard you do this a couple of years, is talking about changing the budget process in Colorado to take power away from ABC, maybe do committees of reference. It's an interesting discussion, and I want to let you respond, but I see Senator Hansen.
I'd love to chat about that, Jesse. Yeah, I brought a concurrent resolution several different times that would have referred to the people of Colorado the idea that we should have a 60-day instead of a 120-day session in the odd-numbered years and a 90-day session in the even-numbered years and do a budget that's a biennial budget in those even-numbered years. And here's the kicker. Senator Hansen's turning pale as I say this. I would refer the budget out to the committees of reference. The Education Committee would deal with education budget matters. The Transportation Committee would deal with transportation matters, etc.
Well, Senator Hansen,
Big
I saw you.
policy.
Yeah, well, especially on the teacher pay aspect, right? I know there were questions about constitutionality, and this might be rehashing the debate that we saw on the Senate floor about this. But why don't you go ahead and respond to Lundeen's?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. And it is a little bit of a repeat of the debate that I had with Senator Lundeen, a very spirited debate, a very productive debate. I think what Senator Lundeen left out, though, and the question I asked on the Senate floor, which you mentioned, which is, well, what do you want to cut? Which other thing should we get rid of? Because what we did was we took about half of the negative factor away this year. The Democrats prioritized education. We prioritized adding more money so the districts can pay their teachers more. I mean, we did that, and we did it in a way that's sustainable, so that we can continue that level and increase it in the following years. And I think that's just smart budgeting. I mean, we also put away a significant reserve and made sure that we're not going to have a big cliff effect, even if we do have some economic downturn. So I think it's a really it's a nice applause line. It's a nice thing to put on a campaign radio ad. But I think we have to look seriously at what the knock-on effects would have been if we would have gone with Senator Lundeen's proposal. And the knock-on effect is we would have had to cut healthcare, we would have had to cut money for IDD and intellectually developmentally disabled care. I mean, there's so many things that would have had to get cut to go the direction that he suggests. And I think that was really the core work of the Budget Committee is to try to balance those things out. And we made a huge step forward on K-12, about $380 million additional. A huge down payment on that negative factor that we've talked about, and then at the same time, delivered a lot of other important priorities in the state budget. So that's the normal process. And I would say, to the proposal to move things to committees of reference, that's a perfectly fine proposal. Many other states do it that way, but many other states also have a lot of trouble with that system because you essentially get a huge amount of back and forth on individual proposals, and there's not really a coherent picture because you have individual committees, 10 or 11 legislators who are looking at just one small part of the budget instead of having a more total view, which is what we try to do in the Joint Budget Committee. So there are some big downsides in going that direction.
Yeah, and if I could get, I see I've got a picture up now. Golly, I don't know whether that's handsome or ugly, but we'll take it. It's better than me just being in the dark here with you. My response back would be it's just a matter of budget prioritization. It's priorities. We created 820 new FTE in the 22-23 long bill. That's FTE stands for full-time equivalent employees in state government. And we put the general fund cost at $208 million to create new offices with another 166 additional full-time equivalents. So we're expanding government dramatically. My preference, my policy response to the honest question that I have been asked is I wouldn't create another dozen offices and divisions and departments of government, as has happened here in Colorado over the past 4 years under Democratic control.
Jesse, can I just...
Well, we can talk about it. All right, 10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Just quickly, I know this is one of Paul's favorite talking points about the 822 new employees. Keep in mind that's less than 2% change. The state is growing, the state is changing faster than 2%. So I just want to put that in perspective. Of course, the state government gets a little bit bigger because Colorado gets a little bit bigger every year. So I just want to make sure your listeners know that context.
We have a lot of really good reporting on this Colorado Sun to put a plug in for kind of being able to step through these questions. Ken Ashmabadi, my colleague, wrote a really good story looking at government, and we have stories about Tabor and the restrictions on government in future years. There's a lot of interesting things that are going to be at play here. They're going to be wishing that we had a 30-day session the next couple of years, probably, as reporters. I don't know about lawmakers.
60.
Hansen, let me ask you a question.
60. I'll give you 60.
Okay. Senator Hansen, let me ask you a question about one of the more interesting moments of the session that didn't get a lot of coverage. We tried to parse it out, but it was a really fascinating situation around climate change and wildfires. I know you and I have talked a lot about this, but you had introduced this amendment that would have started the process for creating a building code for wildfire-prone areas of the state. It was introduced as an amendment to another bill. It was one of the most tense moments I saw during the session, where Republicans essentially threatened to stop all lawmaking protests of this. The amendment was withdrawn. We didn't see it come back. But I wanted to ask, about why this is so important to you, and if you're planning to bring it back next year. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, a really important debate, and one that did not get the full treatment that I think it deserved this year. You know, we have had year after year the worst, biggest fire seasons in Colorado history. We just keep breaking our own records. The reason wildfire risk is climbing in Colorado and the reason drought is getting worse in Colorado is because of climate change. And so I think the state has really stepped up and answered this responsibility. We have put in, you know, about $120 million over the last several years for things like more firefighting aircraft and helicopters and mitigation programs, recovery of watersheds that were damaged by fires. So the state has really stepped up and put in new resources to help Colorado adjust to this new climate danger, this new wildfire risk. And what I think has really been missing is the local action to complement the state resources. And by that, I mean, when we build new buildings, let's do it in a way that they are more fire resistant. And there's been a huge amount of success by you doing these types of wildfire building codes all over the country. They reduce the amount of damage, they reduce the amount of risk, they reduce the amount of money that the state has to spend to fight wildfires. So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Let's build new buildings at a higher standard and really reduce costs over time, because we're reducing the amount of fire damage that would occur. And so this is really what I was asking with that amendment, was to put in place a process to move toward statewide wildfire mitigation codes. And we know the economic payback is just massive for the state. And it's just urgent because the wildfires are getting worse. It's not getting better.
So let me jump in and speak a little bit, not so much to the policy, because I think an interesting and complete policy debate would be a very good thing to have on this particular issue. To get to the tense moment and the kind of tension, I would say, between Republicans and Democrats, there was the process was, and what happened was, there was an effort to put a building codes amendment, substantial, 6 or 7 or 8 pages in nature, into a bill about forest management, on the fly at the last minute. Now, maybe a good place to put it, maybe not a good place to put it, but as the senator just said, I agree, this is a good policy conversation to have. And understanding the trade-offs, the pluses and the minuses of changing building codes, which are not a matter of statewide control typically, but a matter of local decision, guided by both national and international and state feedback, but a local decision to fold that into a bill on the fly in the last 48 hours of a legislative session, probably not the best process. And so that's where the tension came from. To the policy conversation, I'm going to say the trade-offs, and again, this Senator Hansen, I could probably talk for about 20 minutes apiece on the trade-offs of this. But right now, the biggest crisis the people of Colorado have is one of affordability. We're 175,000 dwellings behind where we need to be just to get back to the ratios we had for the previous 20 years. We need dwellings. We need places for people to live in order to drive the cost of living down, in order to make living in Colorado more affordable. Putting a statewide building code specifically with regard to perspectives around climate change may be beneficial, may be expensive, and we need to have that conversation, figure out what the trade-offs are, and determine which way do we want to go forward. And so pushing it into a bill in the last minute, probably not the best way to do it. Would have put the policy in place had it been successful, but I don't know that missing out on the meaningful debate would have been the appropriate way to go. It sounds like I might be having some tech issues. I hope not.
No, we can hear you, Senator. Let me follow up on that with 2 questions that I think are important. So one, on this issue, right? I mean, if we build homes in wildfire-prone areas that burn down, people's insurance rates up, right? You know, that's a fear that I know people have, and we've seen that play out in California. It's been a huge issue. And also, you know, there's the cost to the state budget. So every time a community burns to the ground, there's a lot of money that has to be spent in response. I've heard people say, you know, this is a good reason to have that. What do you think about those counter arguments about this idea?
Well, the way I'd respond is there are market forces. If an insurance company prefers a home built to codes that would be in the nature of the 8 or 10-page amendment that would have been offered, and only underwrites and provides insurance to homes built that way, that would naturally drive people that way. So that is one potential way to get at it. A statewide mandate that thou shalt build houses like this may or may not be the best way to get at it, but it's certainly a way to get at it.
And Senator Hansen, I will go ahead and let you respond to if you.
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, the evidence we have from other states is that it drastically lowers the state costs. It drastically lowers insurance costs for the homeowners, and it makes entire communities more resilient. And so I think it's far past time that we step up and take this step. The other thing to mention is that Colorado has missed out on about $100 million in federal fire mitigation funds because we don't have statewide codes. So this is going to take federal, state, and local action. Right now, the state has stepped up in a major way over the last 3 budgets. And without local action on codes, we are missing out on significant federal help. So for us to be successful, we're going to need all 3 parts. And it was really disappointing that we couldn't even have this debate. And process-wise, I mean, this amendment had taken months to develop. We had copies of it on members' desks 2 weeks before I brought it to the well. And so I think let's be really clear. It was stopped cold by a Republican filibuster. They basically said, we're not going to do any more legislative business if you bring this amendment. And I think it was a huge missed opportunity, and the economics are super compelling.
And my response back is I look forward to a really important, very robust conversation about this as a bill, not an amendment dropped into another bill in the last 48 hours of a pressurized session.
And I will just say here that this is kind of what the Senate's like every day. So it's really fun to have these kind of debates, sit there and listen to people.
Well, I enjoy always giving and taking with Senator Hansen. And I get to say that on a radio program. I can't say that on the Senate floor. I have to say the good senator from Denver. But the reality is, Chris is a friend. We disagree vigorously at times, but I respect him, and I do want to have an iron sharpening iron policy conversation about this.
All right. Well, I'm going to sharpen my irons with these next 2 questions a little bit. So, Senator Hansen, let me start with you. The fentanyl bill, was one of the bills that people watch most closely during the session, and you were one of the votes in the Senate, one of a handful of Democratic votes that would have taken out this aspect of it, that folks who were in possession of more than a gram of fentanyl would have been charged with felony, but only if they knew it. You were one of the folks who voted to take the if they knew it aspect out of it. And then you were part of the conference committee that landed where helped shape the last bit of the bill. Can you talk a little bit about why you were uncomfortable with that, knowing we call it mens rea, it's a complicated legal term, aspect that was in the bill that came across, and why you decided to strip that out?
Yeah, no, it's really one of the most important debates we had all session, and one that obviously came to its end right on the last day. And what you described is exactly right. I guess my feeling was, when the bill came over from the House, the amendments that the House had put on that bill, and basically this double standard of having to prove that the person knew they had drugs and they knew that they had fentanyl as part of those drugs, really created a impossible situation for DAs across the state to be able to prosecute these crimes. And that, to me, felt like a really bad place for this bill to land. And unfortunately, what the House sent us was simply unworkable. And so I talked with a lot of my colleagues and looked for ways that we could strengthen the bill, make it more workable, so that we can address this crisis that we're in right now. Because there are situations where, yes, we need treatment. There are situations where folks, it really is needed to be treated as a health crisis. There are other situations where we need to be able to prosecute crimes. And unfortunately, the bill that the House sent over and the amendments that got put on in the Appropriations Committee in the House made the bill unworkable. And so really tried to focus on that in the last couple of days of session. And as you said, I think we came up with a really nice solution in conference committee. We were able to maintain the ability of the prosecutors around the state to be able to do their jobs, for the police departments around the state to be able to do their jobs. And at the same time, make sure the folks who are ready for treatment can get that first. And so I think we ended in a really good spot, and significantly improved the bill that had come over from the House.
And Senator Lundeen, I know you were one of the senators who wanted, correct me if I'm wrong here, that the possession, the felony level be dropped to 0. But with the change where the bill ended up, notwithstanding, lowering possession to 0 for a felony, what are your thoughts on final?
Yeah, the mens rea, which is Latin for guilty mind, it's somebody knowingly or knows they committed a crime, or they would commit a crime if they allowed something to happen. that was an important part of, I think, a delicately balanced negotiation that the Senate created as it went to the House. Unfortunately, it came back from the House without that in it, with a complicated, jumbled up, and I agree with Senator Hansen, it was kind of, you got to prove the negative, prove the positive kind of circumstance, which was very difficult to get to. But still, from my perspective, this fentanyl crisis we have in Colorado is a nightmare. It is a shock to our body politics, a shock to our society, and a shock to our system. Think of this, a sugar packet, a little teeny sugar packet like you get at the coffee shop. If that were fentanyl, that's enough to kill more than 1,000 people. And with something that is that fatal, that deadly, that pernicious, we really need, I believe, to have a policy that is a shock to the system. And I believe the supply chain disruption, that bringing the possession rate down to zero that would be created would give law enforcement the tools they need. I'm not quite as optimistic as Senator Hansen may be that the DAs will have what they need to prosecute and disrupt this crisis we have in Colorado with the bill as passed, which is why I opposed it. I would have sought a stronger set of crimes, a stronger set of law enforcement elements, and I supported in the bill most of the bill was about harm reduction, about public health issues. I really supported that element in the bill, good parts of the bill, but I don't think we got our hands around the necessary parts of the law enforcement piece that we should have in order to disrupt this crisis that is fentanyl in Colorado today.
You know, one of the things that was really not discussed too much around this bill, everyone was focused on this one aspect of it, was the fact that there were tens of millions of dollars for treatment, for fentanyl testing, for purchasing opioid overdose reversal drugs, and that's an important part of this. Plug another Colorado Sun story. We wrote about this at length, breaking down the different aspects. So Senator Lundeen, it's time for your tough question. The House Republicans last week, when they held their news conference, kind of wrapping up the session, took aim at Denver. One of the Representative Matt Soper called downtown a toilet bowl. I think Senator or Representative McKean said it's a place that no one wants to visit anymore. And as somebody who's in charge of trying to get the Republicans to win back the majority in the Senate, I want to ask, is that a winning political strategy? What do you don't speak for the House lawmakers, but obviously Republicans stick together in the legislature. You guys have to win back these Denver area seats.
Yep.
What are folks trying to get at? I've heard a lot of attacks on the capital city.
What the people of Colorado broadly, and in the exurbs where the competitive seats will be, and quite frankly in the suburbs and downtown Denver, are calling for is a more affordable life in Colorado. Cost of living is running away. Nationally, we have an 8.5% inflation rate. That means that everything you're buying, you're going to have to make more money to buy, 8.5% more to keep up with your cost of living. But here's the tragedy. The inflation rate's worse in Colorado than the national inflation rate. Second thing people in Colorado are really concerned about, calling out, crying for, is safer communities, less dangerous neighborhoods. The reality is, in Colorado, a car is being stolen every 14 minutes. That's a problem, and we need to get a handle on that. And the third thing, parents are calling for greater authority over their child's education. So they want to know that they are, in fact, the parent with authority over their child's education. And they want to work in partnership, I believe, with local school districts and local schools. But they, at the end of the day, are the parent. They're the responsible party, and they are their children. No one loves that child more than the parents. So those are the three big things. And I think to the extent we have been for years, Republicans fighting to make life more affordable, make our communities safer, and give parents greater authority. And to the extent we say with that message, we're going to win. I'd love to have 5 minutes to make a closing argument on this conversation, to map out some of the things we've heard from the governor, from the senator, and we have elements of agreement. But quite frankly, I think that Republicans would go at some of the solutions differently, give people more authority over their lives, and expect less of a collection from the people in order to create more government to, help those people live the life better that government sees they should be living.
Let me just drill down on the question, though. Do you think that it's a winning strategy for Republicans, even if it's not in your own caucus, to attack them? That, I mean,
I guess I just ask back to you, Jesse, to Senator Hansen, to anybody who moves in and around Denver. Do they feel Denver's on a good track right now? I think Denver could do better. I think Senator Hansen has aspirations to help Denver do better. The reality is it's not as safe as it was when I first showed up at the legislature 8 years ago. I feel less safe moving around the streets of Denver today than I did then. And I think many people share that experience. Now, do you build a campaign on that? No, you build a campaign on helping the people of Colorado.
Well, let me ask one last question here, and Senator Hansen, I'm sure we're going to be talking about what he was mentioning in a few months. But I want to ask, Governor mentioned something just to kind of cap this conversation off. The governor mentioned that if gas prices are still high at the beginning of next year or late at the end of this year, that he would support an effort to pause the gas fee that was implemented by mostly Democrats in the legislature further. Senator Hansen, you'd be in charge of spending that money in the joint budget committee, and Senator Lundeen, you'd probably have to end up voting for that proposal. I guess let's start with Hansen. Do you think that's a good idea, or do you think the legislature would be amenable to extending that pause?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jesse. I just want to say first, thank you, Senator Lundeen, for not calling Denver a toilet bowl. I appreciate you not adding to that. Denver definitely has issues like every other city, but this is a wonderful city, and I appreciate the question from Jesse, because that is not going to be a winning strategy. I can say with clarity. I think on the gas fees that we put in place that complement the gas tax, this is how we're going to pay for infrastructure in the state of Colorado. We are billions and billions of dollars behind because we haven't adjusted fuel fees for many, many years. They haven't been adjusted for inflation in about 30 years. And that's why we're so far behind. So, I think as we look at the economic data, we saw a spike in inflation. We thought it made sense to reduce some fees, provide some direct property tax relief, provide quicker payment on some of the tax refunds that are coming, all to try to address this affordability question. And I think the Democrats delivered on that this session. Whether we need to do that in the future, I think we just have to wait and see what the economic conditions look like. But I do know that Colorado wants good infrastructure. We want good roads, and we need to have a dedicated funding source for that. And so that's always going to be the balance. But I think you have a legislature that's proven that it can carefully look at economic data and make adjustments to make sure that Colorado families can thrive.
Senator Lundeen?
Yeah, absolutely. The tax relief that is coming back to the taxpayers, to great acclamation from my colleagues in the Democrat Party, is actually coming back to the people of Colorado because the Constitution of the state of Colorado says that money shall come back to them. It's the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that's writing them those $500 and $1,000 checks. When confronted with the question of what was Bill 1351 and Bill 1001, which were a couple of fee relief bills, the governor said, well, we'll just, and I wrote it down, just use other funds. Now, 1351 said, put a pause on the gas tax, put a pause on the fee on the gas tax. The governor said, we'll just use other funds. Well, that is exactly what I started this conversation with. It's a matter of prioritization. To use Governor Polis's words, let's just use other funds. And the tacit acknowledgement is if we can pause that fee, we can cancel that fee. And that's what we should do, and just use other funds, reprioritize the money for the benefit of the people of Colorado. Increasing fees on the people of Colorado now, everybody agrees. In this election season, the Democrats have joined us as Republicans clamor for lower fees, lower taxes. The Democrats have joined us prior to the election. I would say past the election, we should still give the people the relief from fees, the relief from taxes, leave that pause on fees in place permanently.
All right, and I know that's something that other Republicans echoed earlier last week when the legislature ended. So we're past time. I got to move on to our next panel, but I want to really thank you guys for the lively discussion. Senators Hansen, Senator Lundeen. Really appreciate it. Thank you for engaging and being really thoughtful in your response.
Always, Jesse.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Thank you to your listeners. Really appreciate the time with you.
All right, so we're going to move into our final panel of the evening. So waiting in the wings are two state representatives, a Republican and a Democrat. So I'll go ahead and introduce them. So we've got State Representative Brianna Titone, an R-Wellington Democrat and the first transgender state lawmaker elected in Colorado. And she is joined by State Representative Mike Lynch, a Wellington Republican who was, until the very end of the session, one of the prime sponsors of the Fentanyl Accountability and Prevention Bill, one that we were just talking about a few seconds ago. So Representative Lynch, I guess I'll start with you. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about those negotiations and why you decided to pull your name off that bill at the last minute, last, I guess, hours of the legislative session, and some of the behind the scenes things that maybe we didn't get to know about that were going on with that legislation.
Yeah. Well, I apologize. I'm in my truck. I had another event going on here. So, yeah. So, my heart was completely into that bill. I mean, I've got to tell you, there's not a bigger issue that we need to deal with in this state than fentanyl. And that bill does a ton of really great things. As it exists today, it is a great bill. However, where it fell short is that we couldn't come to the conclusion that the law enforcement 100% told us where they needed to be with this. So we as a legislative body did not give the tools that were necessary for those guys to do their job. And I'm a buckle maker. I don't know anything, right? And when I hear 100% of law enforcement in this state say we need to have these tools and we don't provide them to them, and I will tell you that the bill, as it came back from the Senate, I would have stayed on the bill. It was good at that point, and we didn't concur, and my heart broke because I put a ton of work into that bill, and I couldn't get behind it because of that, because we couldn't give them the tools they need to fix this problem. And it's not just a drug problem, it's a poison problem. And so that's why I bailed. So.
And Representative Titone, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you voted to pass the bill. I can't keep track of everyone's votes, but that's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but talk to me about what your feelings were on that bill. It was certainly, extremely, political at the end, and just a lot of emotions.
Yeah, I was in agreement with the speaker going into the negotiations and the way we passed the bill out of the House, and the possession part was the part that really had the most contention. And I think we can all agree, and we heard even Senator Lundeen say there was a lot of really good parts of this bill that are really going to make a big difference in saving lives. It's really the possession part that's the pinch point. When I look at possession and penalties on possession that go into the felony range, I think back to the war on drugs, and I think that 1980s calling again, and the drug policies coming back. That's not a winning way to do it. That's not how we can actually solve the problem. What we saw in the 80s through a zero tolerance felony possession policy was that it went from 40,000 people to 400,000 people in prison for possession. That doesn't solve the addiction problem. That's not how we solve the problem of drugs. A lot of the parts of the bill that we all agree on is really great do help to solve that, getting people off the drugs, getting people into treatment. But we can't make every single user of fentanyl into a felon, because there's a lot of ramifications to that. There's a lot of unintended consequences that go along with that. Somebody who might end up with this drug for the first time, they get hit with a felony. The first time they ever buy drugs, they think it's something else, which wouldn't be as big of a crime. Now they have a felony on their record. How do you get out of that? You can't get housing. You can't get a job. That haunts you for a very long time. And that really hurts our economy. That hurts a lot of people's lives that, we're trying to help. We're trying to help them get off of that. So, the possession down to zero, as a misdemeanor, at least for 1 gram, I think is a reasonable compromise. I think we did okay with that compromise. It's not exactly the way I would have liked it, but I think, I didn't have a say in how those conversations went. That was there was a lot of robust conversations about it. But I think that not having that possession, and it's a small amount, to give people that chance to have an off-road, to not get the felony, I think is a necessity in this case, because possession for for a felony at that small amount is just a dangerous thing that we know doesn't work from past results of laws that we've seen and seen the results of.
Representative Lynch, I know I talked to you during the session about this, and I think I watched you at the well, and it seemed like you really felt passionately about from the perspective of policy and wanting to make sure that save lives. But the debate was so colored by politics outside of the building. I wonder if you can talk about how that influenced where the bill wound up. If you wish that maybe didn't change things or influence the process so much.
Right. Jesse, this this bill was never a possession bill. And the speaker said that from the well. If somebody wanted to run a possession bill, they should have ran it. But I will tell you, public discourse and the public sentiment took it to the point where it was really a referendum on 1263 from 2019, and so that took over this bill. This bill that I started off with, a 4-page bill with no appropriation, just basically gave the prosecutors a little more leverage against the manufacturers and distribution folks. But what happened is that possession became a huge part of this, and so if we're going to do that, we need to do that, right? If we're gonna fight possession, we need to fight possession, and it completely took over the bill. There are so many good things about this bill, and this is why my heart broke when I couldn't get off it, because I know it did so many things. But politically, the bill became a possession bill, and a referendum on 1263. So, at the last minutes, literally at the last minutes, what the Senate sent us was something I could completely live with. But we put language in there that made it really hard for prosecutors to actually prosecute people at 1 gram. And so, yeah, we said we took it down to a felony at 1 gram, but we didn't really, because it's hard for people to prosecute that. So it got really complicated literally at the last minute on this bill.
And Representative Lynch is mentioning referencing House Bill 2019-1263, which made possession of most drugs up to 4 grams a misdemeanor, including fentanyl, which, again, go back to Colorado Sun. We wrote a lot about these debates and issues. So if you want to read more. Representative Titone, you always sponsor some of the most interesting bills at the legislature. I know a few years ago we had the body composting one, which was super interesting and stoked a lot of water cooler conversation. This year you had a bill that kind of piqued my interest about requiring food providers to ask people if they wanted single-use food serviceware and condiments or deciding to hand it out. Denver has a similar policy. This bill ended up dying in committee. It's geared toward environmental policy. Talk about why that failed, and if you think that there's a version that could come back in the future.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting bill. The concept, as you mentioned, says that restaurants should ask, or you should ask the restaurant if you want the single-use utensils. Not everybody is the same. If I get these things and I don't use them, I'll usually put them in a drawer and wait around till I get to use them for camping or when I'm going someplace where I'm going to need that, taking food from home. But for the most part, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people were getting takeout food and they were taking it home or it was being delivered to home. you have a fork there. You have ketchup. You have all that stuff. So, restaurants are really just putting things in a bag that you don't need, and it's costing the restaurants money. So I talked with the restaurant association when we came up with a solution that they agreed on. The fast food restaurants agreed. We had Grubhub and the takeout folks already on board because they already do it in Denver. They have the little checkbox for people to do it, and what the bill ended up being was a guideline of what restaurants should do. It wasn't telling them how to do it. It was telling them how to do it, but there was no penalty for it. So if you wanted to throw your money away and give people stuff that they don't want, you could, but why would you want to? It doesn't make sense. A lot of restaurants were doing it already. And, what happened was I tweeted about it, and it got, the trolls got a hold of that, and they misconstrued what the bill did. And they really hammered me, and it got people in a tizzy. Some op-eds came out about it that we were trying to tell businesses what to do, and not saying that the restaurants agreed with the bill, leaving a lot of important facts out. But that got a lot of legislators, a little bit fearful about what the bill was going to do and how that was going to be perceived. So I decided to kill the bill. Interestingly, though, later on in the session, on the Ag Committee, we heard another bill about teaching gun safety classes in school. And the bill didn't mandate that you did it. It didn't give money to do it. It set up a framework of how you could do it if you wanted to do a gun safety class in school. That bill got a lot of support. It was a bill that didn't do anything except for tell you how you could do it. And that bill got a lot of support. And my bill, got the can. So it was kind of interesting that two bills that really did nothing had quite different results. And, that's kind of the power of spin when it comes to certain policies and how, people get ahead of it. And, I blame myself for getting excited about my own bill and tweeting about it late on a Saturday night, and the trolls really got a hold of it. So that's kind of the story about that bill.
Representative Lynch, you kind of have an interesting perspective here because this is your second year in the legislature. So, talk to me about kind of some of your observations just after after finishing your first term. All the things that Representative Titone talked about are things that I feel like I see play out on a daily basis at the Capitol.
Well, I first of all, I got to say, I just love Representative Titone because, literally, she's one of the people that bring ingenuity to the state capitol. So I just want to say that, and thinking outside the box, because that's what we would expect from people that are elected, right? So I was just smiling on that bill that I was obviously against, but I love the perspective, So that's part of the process that is beautiful, is that we bring completely opposite of perspectives, and then we try to craft stuff that works good. So anyway, I just want to preface with that. But it's really hard for me because we can never get anything done because we're outnumbered, big time. And so, some ideas that we have, we got to be really good at selling that idea to the other side. And it's sometimes we feel like it's not fair, but it makes us better legislators, us being the minority, to bring our ideas forward. And so I just love that perspective that Brianna brought about that bill, which I thought was kind of crazy, but you sell sell it and bring that view to the people. That is what this body is all about.
So at the end of the legislative session, kind of talking about being in the minority, I guess throughout the session, Republicans in the House used, reading at length and some delay tactics to force Democrats to the table. And one of the most interesting things that happened was Republicans really put House Democrats, actually, the entire legislature, kind of up against the wall with, these in a corner with all these, bills that were left in the calendar, time running out. And in exchange to stop some of this delay tactic, there were some concessions made on bills. One bill was killed. But in my feeling, from my perspective, I could see that there were dozens of bills in the calendar that Republicans could have, you know, gotten killed essentially if just by running out the clock in the final days. But it seemed like you guys settled for not as much as you might have been able to get. Can you talk about, if you were happy with how that played out, and if you felt like, Republicans got enough, or if you guys should have held out for longer and seen some more legislation die on the calendar?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a fan of that process that we did, and I mean, you didn't ever see me down there asking for a bill to be read at length, because I believe we should have worked all these things out before. And we should have talked about them. And so I will say my personal opinion is there was a failure in not getting more bills done in the first half of the session. And so, we got pushed to the end. And so, we lost a lot of bills that we cared about too. But that was just part of the sacrifice of doing that. I don't believe that's an effective way of governing, to be honest with you. I really think that if we have more of a dialogue before we get to that point, and work through these bills, and it's sloppy legislation when we have to debate bills that should have had more time, and it's dishonorable to those efforts by all those legislators. I mean, everybody puts their heart in these things, and nobody brings a bill unless they really care about it. I would like to think, and so for folks to push it to the end it's a disservice to the whole process. But that was the only thing we got. That's the only thing we got, is to push things to the bitter end. So I felt bad about that process. I wish we would have debated those bills that were very important to a lot of legislators and a lot of constituents. But that was the tool we had, which was to filibuster, if you will. And it made me sad, but it's a tool that happened to work.
Representative Titone, you've been around for 4 years at the Capitol, so you've seen this kind of play out time and again. This session, at least the journalists and the press corps, and I think some of the members of your caucus wondered why the first 2.5 months or so of the session started out so slowly. Do you feel like Democrats kind of put themselves in a bad position at the end and walked into the situation that unfolded?
Well, I don't think so. I think there were a lot of reasons for that. A lot of the bills that we released a little bit later than they probably would have been. I know there were a lot of late bills in the system. I had some that also got released at the last minute. There was a lot of thought that went into those bills, and I know that leadership was being very thoughtful about the different policies that were being scrutinized to make sure that we were looking at saving people money and making sure that we weren't going to be even considering policies that were going to be outside of what our priorities really were. That was something that was done, very carefully to make sure that, all the stakeholder work had been done and that we knew that the bill was going to have a smooth sailing through as best we could. A lot of the bills were also task force bills, and those needed to be looked at, and the money had to be allocated. A lot of the bills, as you know, in this process, there has to be money allocated to those bills. We have to wait till the long bill is heard. We have to allocate the money through that process, through both chambers. And then we had the money that was allocated through the through the federal funds as well. So we had a lot of money to allocate, and we had a lot of policies that needed to be looked at, which ones were going to be funded, which ones were not. And we had to be very critical about the prioritization process, about what we were really thinking about were the things that we wanted to see get done. So it's not that we wanted to, really hold a lot of things up. I think it was just an artifact of having this large bucket of money from the federal government, a couple different buckets of money from the federal government. We had all these task force bills. We had the prioritization process, a lot of good concepts. Not everything got funded. I had a couple bills that ended up dying on the calendar. There were some compromises that were made, and I do want to say, Representative Lynch is really good about not being that person that goes down there and asks for the bill to be read at length. And he goes down there with a thoughtful thing to say when he has something to say, and we should have more debate on things. And we did in a lot of these areas. But what I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, because I know a lot of people were kind of like, wow, we still have how many bills on the last 3 days? I think that, we didn't really utilize our Saturdays that often. And, Saturdays are not my preferred day to work. But if we can alleviate some of that pressure, and I know you'd have to work that day too. And thank you for that. But we did have that available, and we did have that tool, and we could have used it a little bit more. But it's all part of that negotiation. It's part of that good faith effort to try to get folks to talk about which bills we're going to do and which ones we're not. I think one of the other problems is that, the Republican Party, and I think Representative Lynch might agree, is that there's two different ideologies over there. And we can try to make some concessions with Minority Leader McKean, but there's a few outliers who don't want to go along with that. And sometimes we have to, that wild card gets played. And then, we're like, what? Wait, I thought we had an agreement here. And now the bills are being read at length again. So that was something that, none of us really had any control over. And, we all wanted to get things done. We wanted to negotiate things, but that wild card really just kind of threw a monkey wrench in everything.
One of the interesting things that I think happened for a few bills at the end of the session was we would ask, what's going on? Why is it being fought? And it was like, well, we agreed to 4 hours to debate on it, and then we're going to move on, which is something that people who are watching at home are always like not knowledgeable about, right? I mean, these things are a lot of the stuff that happens at the Capitol are, speeches that have been prepared beforehand or debates that have been negotiated out, which I think. So we're coming to the end of our program here, and I have a question for you, Representative Titone, because one of the big questions that I have heading into next session is who the House Speaker is going to be, and who the House Majority Leader is going to be. You're losing both your Speaker and your Majority Leader. So I wonder if you have any insight into that, and if you want to make any announcements about your future leadership positions. I don't know if you're somebody who's going to throw their name into the ring or hat into the ring.
Well, I mean, historically, there's not a lot of times when a third term legislator gets the Speaker position. So being that that's kind of a tradition that has only been broken a few times, I think about who's going to be there the final term. So, there's not too many folks that are in that category. I think Representative Kennedy would be a good choice for Speaker, and for Majority Leader, I think there's quite a few people that would like to step up, and that's something I would like to try to throw my hat into as well. I think that I had a slow start in my first session. I was a little shy, rightfully so, being a trans person in the chamber for the first time, and people didn't really know who I was. But I think that this time, this last couple of years, I've really spent a lot more time on the other side of the aisle chatting with people and getting to know them. And of course, that went right out the window because like half the people aren't even going to be there again. There's going to be a whole new group of people to get to know. But I think that there's a few good prospects. Who actually steps up to do it? I've heard a couple different people name being thrown around, but you know how rumors go. You don't know until it actually gets closer to that time. And we have an election to do. So, let's put the cart before the horse. Don't put the cart before the horse here. Let's just do one thing at a time.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm all for. As a journalist, I like to get ahead of my skis sometimes. So I appreciate that, and I want to respect both of your time. So we'll wrap it up here. Thank you, representatives, both so much for joining us. Really appreciate your perspectives and for talking about your legislation in the session. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, all of our readers and viewers. The Colorado Sun is made possible by the support from you guys, and we're so appreciative of all the folks who sign up. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty behind the scenes of political world and Colorado politics, sign up for the unaffiliated newsletter by becoming a premium member or by upgrading. We really dump all the kind of information that you'd want to know. If you're a person who liked this event, that newsletter is for you. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about what happened here tonight. Have some great insight into that toilet bowl comment about Denver. Some interesting information about congressional candidates heading into election season. It's going to be kind of a must read on Tuesdays and Fridays for folks. And if you're interested in sponsoring one of these events, you can reach out to Sylvia at coloradosun.com or Christina at coloradosun.com. These events, lots of viewers, lots of engaged people, and we always appreciate those who support them. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and we'll see you soon at the next Colorado Sun Political.